Hey, juniors. Well, we're still at home. So, hopefully you were able to get all of my instructions clearly. It looks like everybody has joined Google Classroom except for Callie, and I think that she may be coming back from Montana. She may be stuck in weather, I'm not sure, but it looks like everybody's good. I'm going to upload your lesson to Google Classroom tomorrow, and we'll see how the week plays out. Can't imagine we wouldn't be back at school on Thursday. So we're just going to assume that this is a lesson for Tuesday. So first of all, if you have not taken the quiz yet over your reading assignment, then you need to stop the video and go do that. The quiz will be available to you from 11 to 11:30, which is way longer than you need. That I wanted to make sure if there was any confusion or couldn't get it open or whatever, you'd have time to do that. If you submit it after 11:30, it will be considered late and there'll be a penalty on it. Obviously, this is a quiz that you should not be using your book for, the internet for, any notes for. It would be as if you were in class and I passed it out and said, okay, do it. So I am going to ask you at the end of the quiz to just attest to the fact that you did not cheat. I hate to even ask you to do that, and I don't think anybody in class would cheat, but I feel like it gives a little accountability, as I said before, to you and to me, to make sure that we're all on the same page and we all understand. So if you haven't taken the reading quiz yet, go back and do that. Make sure you submit it by 11:30. Answer it to the best of your ability, and we'll go over it when I see you on Thursday. Okay, so for today's lesson, I'm going to cover a little bit about the Emancipation Proclamation and the Battle of Antietam. I have a couple of videos that I want you to watch. I have a PowerPoint that I've loaded and is part of this lesson in Google Classroom that I want you to look over. I'll make copies of all of this like I will for today's lesson or Monday's lesson as well. So just follow all my instructions. The daily assignment log that you will sign off on at the end of the lesson will kind of go through and say, did you do this? Did you do that? Just to make sure you've done everything you're supposed to do. This lesson will not be, the video lecture will not be super long. There are several things that I would normally show. So a couple of different movie clips from various movies that I don't have their whole movies, and I have no way to show you just the clips that I want to. So I will do that upon our return on Thursday. So, all right. So after you've taken the video quiz, you'll notice there's a picture on the PowerPoint that says reading quiz, pages 273 to 278. And there's that picture that I showed you before of Abraham Lincoln standing amongst some Union officers. One of them is George McClellan, and he's standing head and shoulders above almost every single one of them. That picture was actually taken at the Battle of Antietam. Maryland is obviously very close to Washington, D.C., so Abraham Lincoln came up to the front. He wanted to visit with his officers, his generals. If you will recall, Robert E. Lee's plans to penetrate Maryland and to engage the Union Army was revealed. The secret was revealed because the plans were discovered by some sort of Union courier who then made it available to George McClellan, who unusually, unlike him, acted decisively and went after Robert E. Lee. I can't remember if the book addresses this, but McClellan wanted to make sure it wasn't a trick to get him caught or ambushed. And so once he had decided that it was not a trick and that indeed someone had very foolishly left the lesson plans behind. I'm not the lesson plans. That's what I'm doing. The military plans behind. He acted upon them. The next slide is a timeline of events that we've already discussed. It's just another way to look at things chronologically. As I've mentioned to you before, I'm a chronological learner. I like the cause and effect of things. I'm not going to go through the whole PowerPoint again, this particular slide, but you can review it. It's all the things we've talked about, from Fort Sumter to the Anaconda Plan, First Battle of Bull Run, all of that stuff. President Lincoln's son dying. So the Battle of Antietam followed Robert E. Lee's very successful campaign, the 7 Days Battle campaign, to protect the Confederate capital of Richmond. And after that successful second battle of Bull Run, or the second battle of Manassas, he decides he's going to go into Maryland, into Union territory, and create some havoc. It was really more about a psychological victory. Robert E. Lee and the Confederates believed that if they brought the fight to the Union, to the people living in those Union states, perhaps the love of war and the desire to crush the Confederates would wane, politically speaking, and Abraham Lincoln would lose his popularity, maybe even not be reelected, and be willing to settle for a truce in which the Confederates go about and continue to be the Confederate States of America, and the Union goes on to be the United States of America. So it's a gamble, but one that Robert E. Lee wants to take. And so the Battle of Antietam, it actually begins in September of 1862. Let's see here. Next slide shows a picture of Robert E. Lee next to a picture of George McClellan. It says the pivotal point, Antietam, September 1862. So Antietam is a turning point for a lot of reasons. First of all, of course, the Confederates are invading Union territory. Second, while it is a victory for the Union, it's not a decisive victory because, as you will recall, George McClellan decides not to go after Robert E. Lee and lets him retreat back into the safety of Virginia. But it's enough of a victory that Abraham Lincoln, who has been sitting on his Emancipation Proclamation, feels that this is enough of a win to issue this proclamation. Abraham Lincoln, how shall I say, he evolved over the course of his life about his position and his attitude towards slavery. Nobody really knew how to handle it. Nobody knew how to eliminate the slave culture in the South without crushing the economy of the South. Nobody was willing to slowly emancipate the slaves on a large scale. So it was a very tricky position. Politically, someone running for president would never win if he just said, we're going to emancipate all the slaves tomorrow. He wouldn't have been supported in the North or the South, obviously. And so Lincoln's position generally leading up to the war was that he would leave slavery alone where it existed, but he was going to prohibit, any way he could, prohibit the movement of slavery into Western territories. And ultimately what would happen is slavery would fall on its own head. There would eventually be more free states than slave states, and laws would begin to be passed, most likely to call for the eventual abolition of slavery. So it would have eventually toppled. So the Southern states secession is a reaction to that inevitable truth. They knew that. And Abraham Lincoln wasn't quite sure. He refused to accept the Confederate nation or Confederate States of America as a reality. He treated them as member states of the United States in rebellion. He didn't say, oh, it's us and them. He would say, it's us and they are rebelling, like children would rebel. They're still our children and they're in rebellion and we need to bring them back in. And so ultimately over the course of time, he recognized also that the Constitution protected the property of those southern states that were still in the Union in spite of their rebellion, according to Abraham Lincoln's thinking. And so he didn't have the constitutional right to remove or take their property away. And so he used his war powers, his constitutional powers as commander-in-chief, to consider the slaves as the commander at Fort Monroe did. They're contraband. And so he was like, they are part of the war effort for the Confederates. They're building roads and they're growing food. We're going to take them as contraband, part of war contraband, in order to crush the rebellion. But ultimately, by the time 1862 rolls around, he has decided that we can no longer be half slave and half free. The idea of enslaving an entire race of people has got to stop. We got to figure there's got to be a better way. And so he decides he is going to use his war powers to emancipate the slaves. And that Emancipation Proclamation was effective only in the Confederate States that were not controlled by the Union. If Abraham Lincoln were to emancipate, oh, there's my puppy. If President Lincoln were to emancipate the slaves in the border states in the Union, in Missouri, in Kentucky, in Maryland, and in Delaware, those states would have probably joined the Confederacy. potentially. And he couldn't risk that. So he did not emancipate the slaves in those areas of the Union, or in Confederate territory that was already controlled by the Union. He only emancipated the slaves in those areas of the Confederacy that were not under the control of the Union. It was an act of war. It pulled the legs out from underneath the Confederate States. His intention was to eventually introduce an amendment to the U.S. Constitution that would emancipate slaves everywhere, which is what the 13th Amendment was. But the Emancipation Proclamation was the first step in that direction. I have included a copy of the Emancipation Proclamation in your Google Classroom assignment. I do want you to read it independently during this lesson. So I'm not going to read it to you, but I want you to read it independently. Let's see here. All right, so I'm going to zip through this PowerPoint that kind of walks through the actual battle of Antietam. But for your purposes, I wanted you to know that Antietam is a pivotal changing point in the war, because it's the first time the Union the Confederacy invades Union territory, and the slight victory that it was enabled Abraham Lincoln to issue the Emancipation Proclamation. And so General Lee moves into the border state of Maryland. Maryland is a Union state, but they have slaves, so they're a little bit sympathetic to the Confederacy. He faces off with General George McClellan of the Union Army. As I said before, a copy of his plans were found, which probably ultimately cost him the battle. He did not have the element of surprise that he thought he had. The battle technically was a draw, although the Unions claimed victory because they chased Lee back into Virginia, but they did not capture Lee. They did not capture his army. They were able to do some pretty serious damage, but then retreat back into Virginia. A lot of damage was done to them as well. As a result of McClellan's unwillingness to go back after Robert E. Lee and his army, he was fired by Abraham Lincoln, who was exasperated. Had McClellan gone after Lee, captured him, captured a bulk of his army, the war potentially could have ended that day or during the course of those events. Sadly, Antietam was the bloodiest single day of battle in the Civil War, and I believe it still remains the single bloodiest day of battle in American war history. There were, let's see here, between the two armies in one day, there were almost 23,000 casualties. I can't even imagine what the battlefield must have looked like. Now, you have to remember that casualties keeps in mind not just those that were wounded, but it also takes into consideration those who were killed. So killed and wounded, 23,000 people. Now, again, as we said before, to be wounded by a bullet during the Civil War oftentimes meant death down the road. So probably a good percentage of them did die. But the initial tally after the day was fought was close to 23,000 casualties. And then the last bullet point here is that this battle gives Abraham Lincoln the green light to issue the Emancipation Proclamation, which goes into effect on January 1st, 1863. I'm going to go ahead and leave some pictures up here. There was a famous Civil War photographer named Matthew, I can't remember his name. I started to say Matthew Perry, but that's an actor. I'll get back to you on that. But a lot of the pictures that you see here were taken by him, and the pictures are awful. They're in black and white, so they're still pretty gross. But I wanted you to see them. They are images of the dead and wounded, mostly the dead. You can tell that it's been a few days. It was a hot day. The battle was fought. The bodies are swollen. I can't even imagine what it must have smelled like. You'll see dead horses. There are a couple of, there's the first picture that you'll see is actually, I think that it is a creek bed where soldiers were laying down for cover and fighting and were shot and killed there. One of them is a road in town. You'll just see dead bodies everywhere, and they are swollen. The last picture that I have on here, the bodies are shaped, they're laid out in the form of a V, and what would happen is as the sun would go down, the armies would retreat, and everybody would have opportunity to bury the dead. That was just common courtesy. And so they would be lined up They tried to identify them, but unfortunately during the Civil War, men didn't have any sort of identification on them intentionally, like dog tags. And so a lot of bodies were buried without ever being identified. If they had letters on them or a name in a shoe or something, they might be able to find out. But I would say a majority of foot soldiers during the war were probably unidentified and buried in unmarked graves. A lot of the Civil War national cemeteries, they have what look like little stone stumps in the ground, and they are unnamed burial sites. Sometimes in Civil War graveyards, when you go through them, people will have put a penny on top of those unnamed tombs or stones, because Abraham Lincoln's image is on there, kind of in honor of Abraham Lincoln and the cost of somebody's life. But these that are shaped in the V are probably they're probably been laid out for burial. A lot of times they would have free blacks, or even some cases slaves, probably in a lot of cases slaves, especially in Maryland, would come out and they would dig huge trenches and they would bury people in them. I'm going to show a scene from the Battle of Antietam for you in a movie called Glory, and you'll see it's my favorite movie of all time. I'm going to show you some portions of it at school, but you'll see some pretty famous actors in there: Denzel Washington, Morgan Freeman, Matthew Broderick. There's a scene in the Battle of Antietam that's shown at the beginning of the movie that I want to show you. But there is also a very short documentary, no. My dogs are gonna start barking. In National Geographic, or I think it was it was like a news program that did a short show or short episode on the anniversary of the Battle of Antietam. So I would like for you to watch that. It actually says on the slide, it prompts you to watch that. So I will include the link in my instructions. And then there's a picture of the Emancipation Proclamation, and I would like you to read that. I'm gonna upload it. I think it's in a Word doc, and I'll upload that, and I'd like for you to read that. So that's the sum of it. So take the quiz, watch the lecture, watch the extra video, read the Emancipation Proclamation. When you're finished with all that, the quiz is a separate assignment in Google Classroom, since I had to time it. But the rest of this, there is a daily assignment log that when you're finished with everything, you will just fill it out. Yes, I watched it. Yes, I looked at the PowerPoint. Yes, I did blah, 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 and then submit it. And so, I'll let you do the rest of the lesson. I'll leave it open until 5. I'll say it's due at 5. I'll shoot you an email to let you know all of this, but the quiz has to be done between 11 and 11:30, but you can do the rest of the lesson anytime between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. So give you a little bit of flexibility there. So hopefully I'll see you on Thursday. If not, I can't imagine that we would be out on Thursday, but Wednesday's looking pretty sketchy. So there's no homework assignment between Tuesday and Thursday. We'll just regather on Thursday. So thanks.